It's time for another mock draft review. I am Jay Wall, and we are going to be going over all 12 teams in this mock draft. I'll be talking about my favorite pick, my least favorite pick, added notes, and where I think they'll rank in the 2022 season. And so before we get started, make sure and drop that like, subscribe, notification bell. It's the easiest way to support this channel, and it's free. So make sure you do that. All right, let's get started. In the first spot was Gary, and in Gary's team, my favorite pick had to have been Saquon Barkley at the 501. Now, the New York Giants have talked about not re-signing him, which honestly would be huge for Saquon because he was part of one of the worst offenses in the league for multiple years, and so he's still super talented. You know, the injury history is kind of hit or miss, but some of his injuries were the freak accident, like him rolling his ankle on a teammate as he was jogging off the field. So he is someone who I am 100% on board taking him in the 5th round and taking that chance, especially as the RB1 on my team. My least favorite pick here was Elijah Moore at the 612. It's not a terrible pick. I just have little to no faith in Zach Wilson as a QB. So even though Moore has talent, I'm just not sure I'd want to bet on him in Dynasty. And then some added notes. He lacks depth at running back, but his team is built to win now. Jimmy G was honestly one of my favorite picks, up there with Saquon as his QB3. With the last pick was a great scoop, but he does need a backup tight end with the age of Kelsey and injuries becoming more likely. Not saying that it will happen, but it's definitely something you want to take into consideration when drafting, especially for Dynasty. And so the 2022 rank that I would give this team, I would expect this team to come in 4th place. And then moving on to slot 2, we have Super Team. And my favorite pick of theirs was Russell Wilson at the 302. Getting a stud quarterback in the 3rd round is pretty unlikely, and they did just that. My least favorite pick, on the other hand, was DK Metcalf at the 211. Even with the Russ DK stack, it still feels a little too early taking DK Metcalf at the wide receiver 5 position. Again, I do love the stack, but I just feel like DK there was a bit of a reach. I would definitely rather have guys like Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and honestly others on the board. Some added notes. He has some great talent, but a lot of question marks, whether that's drafting for rookies, where Penny and Singletary will be on the depth chart this coming season, DJ Moore's quarterback situation, even though he's an incredible talent. This team for 2022, I would rank as the 10th overall position. And then in the 3rd spot, we have Swamp Nola. My favorite pick of theirs was Zeke at the 703, and that's just insane value for a starting running back. We have Pollard, who went just 2 picks later, and speaking of Pollard, he was my least favorite pick at the 903. After already taking Zeke and Kareem Hunt still being on the board, it just feels like you should have taken that running back that you can actually start week in and week out, where Pollard really isn't someone you want to start unless Zeke is out. And if Zeke is out, that's obviously great because he becomes one of those top 10 running backs. But you already have Zeke. I would take a chance on someone like Kareem Hunt, who can be in that flex conversation, even the RB2 conversation going forward each week. And the other pick that I had to decide between was Justin Fields, who I feel shouldn't have been drafted until the 4th round. I understand the hype with Justin Fields. He's going into his 2nd year. He's a rushing quarterback and whatnot. I just am not sure that I see the value in him long term. He's just someone I'm not willing to take a risk on in the 2nd round. And added notes, we have Waller and Daniel Jones, who are really solid picks to help solidify those positions. And to get Daniel Jones as your QB2 that late in the draft, honestly, I really like that, just considering he is a mobile quarterback and he does offer a semi-decent floor. But there's not really a whole bunch that stands out outside of Jamar Chase in the 1st round when you look at the lineup. Because of that, the 2022 rank that I would give this team is 9th overall. And then moving on to the 4th spot with Brady, my favorite pick there was Cooper Kupp at the 304. I just think that was great value. I know there are some other really good wide receivers that went around that range, but Cooper Kupp is coming off a historic season, and most people think that he'll have a lot of regression heading into next year, but I really don't see the situation where that would actually happen. Matthew Stafford is still going to be there. The situation is still going to be basically the same, and we don't even know if Odell is going to remain on that roster. And then my least favorite pick here was Michael Carter at the 704. It's not a terrible pick, it really isn't, but I would have preferred Tua as my QB3 or Hockenson as my tight end 1. I think it just would have made more sense for this roster, but it's just one of those things where you just look back on and realize some of the things that you should have done differently. But again, I really don't hate that pick very much at all. And so some of the added notes was took some chances on running backs and wide receivers, but honestly has one of the best starts to the draft. That just that second half of the draft just wasn't super ideal in a lot of ways. I think they could have gotten a lot more value, but their 2022 rank, I have them as the 6th overall team, still a very strong team and a team that should make the playoffs. And then in the 5th slot, we have Simon, and Simon did something that he almost never does. He went running back heavy, which if you know me, I know Josh likes to give me a hard time, but my favorite teams typically are the ones that you go running back the first 2 rounds. But the reason that is because you can typically soak up a lot of wide receiver value later on, and that's exactly what Simon did. But my favorite pick of his was Jonathan Taylor at the 5th overall pick. To me, that's honestly crazy. I think Jonathan Taylor is no worse than a top 4 pick. Getting him in the 5th pick, I mean, you can't pass that up. My least favorite pick is Justin Ross at the 1105. I really don't know a whole bunch about Justin Ross, to be honest, but I think he has a strong enough wide receiver room where he could have taken Gesicki, which would have been a better fit with Knox as the tight end 1, and Gesicki would have been a great backup with similar production. So I think I would have made that move if it were my team and if I were drafting. And some added notes is there's really not much weakness on his team. I do love the Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams stack, even with the uncertainty. I think you can typically bet on guys returning to their teams. And I think this is the strong favorite to win in 2022. And therefore, I have Simon's team ranked as the 1st overall team. And then in the 6th spot, we have G-Man J. And my favorite pick of his was TJ Hockenson at the 706. Now, the thing with that pick that I love so much is TJ Hockenson has similar value to Goddard, Waller, and honestly, George Kittle. So the fact that he got him a round or 2 after is just great value there, and I really like that pick. My least favorite pick was Jalen Hurts at the 207. Give me Stafford, give me Russ, even Deshaun Watson with the uncertainty. I'm an Eagles fan, and I get it, but I just don't have a ton of faith in Jalen Hurts being the quarterback of the future. Do I think he'll be the quarterback next year? Absolutely. So I think for short term, it's a great pick, but for long term, man, I can't take a short-term risk in my 2nd round. And then some added notes, an incredibly well-rounded team with some question marks, but if 1 or 2 of those players pan out, whether that's Calvin Ridley, Miles Sanders, Michael Thomas, Allen Robinson, James Robinson, if a couple of those players pan out, that'll be really, really good value, and that would be huge. And for that upside purpose, I have his team ranked in 2022 as the 3rd overall team. And in the 7th spot, we have another member of the Front Yard Fantasy team, and it is Josh. And my favorite pick of his was easily Tyler Lockett at the 1006. I have been notoriously low on Tyler Lockett just with his consistency and whatnot, but to get him in the 10th round, and he is coming off a season where I think he was around the wide receiver 12 to 14. And so to get that in the 10th round is insane. And he's an older wide receiver, but he's still a wide receiver who will produce for the next 3 years, hands down. I love that pick and that value. My least favorite pick here was Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 806. I personally would honestly rather have Tyler Lockett over Amon-Ra. It just shows the values changing in the youth of those wide receivers. But personally, I'd rather have the next 8 or 9 wide receivers that came off the board after Amon-Ra. And some added notes are he's got great quarterbacks. Incredible quarterback room. But honestly, mediocre everywhere else. Again, he's got some good value here and there, but nothing that really makes me say wow. And so because of that, the 2022 rank I have Josh at is 8th place. And then moving on to the 8th spot, we have N. Haas, which is my good friend Nolan Hostetler. And my favorite pick of his was Justin Jefferson at the 108. To get Justin Jefferson that late is a really great value. And to see how much farther he went off the board past Chase is great too. I have Justin Jefferson as my wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. My least favorite pick, though, was Zach Wilson at the 108. Give me Carr, Tannehill, Willis, and Cousins if I'm talking about quarterbacks. But I said it before, I said it earlier, I have little to no faith in Zach Wilson as a quarterback. The good thing is he was drafted with the 2nd overall pick, which means that he basically has a guaranteed starting role for the next 3-4 years. And so that is kind of the only upside I see with Zach Wilson, is that security as a starter. Some of the added notes is he's got a fairly balanced team with a good mix of youth and vets. And because of all of this, I have his team ranked in 2022 as the 5th overall team. Moving on to the 9th round, we have Z2. My favorite pick of his was Aaron Jones at the 604. I just think that Aaron Jones, especially with the emergence of A.J. Dillon and the uncertainty in Green Bay, his value has dropped too low, and Z2 took advantage of that. And to get Aaron Jones as your RB3 in the 6th round, I just love that value. My least favorite pick was Darnell Mooney at the 509. Give me D-Hop, give me Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman, Amari Cooper, and Mike Evans, who are all taken after him. Some added notes is kind of like what I mentioned before, crazy depth at running back, but in need of a consistent quarterback too. One of my least favorite wide receiver rooms in this league, though, and because of that, I have his 2022 ranking as 7th overall. And then we have the guest in the 10th spot. We have Calvin. And my favorite pick of his was George Kittle at the 510. And honestly, I know I took Pitts in the 2nd round, but I was really hoping that George Kittle would fall to me at that 512. And so I couldn't believe how much George Kittle was falling. I absolutely love that pick. Such great value. And my least favorite pick was definitely Trevor Lawrence at the 110. I think he's a mid to late 2nd round pick. It's hard for me to draft with some uncertainty. Yes, he has a ton of talent, but the situation in Jacksonville isn't great. The culture isn't great. And I just can't spend a 1st round pick on someone who has that many question marks. And some added notes are, doesn't have a clear starting running back for their team, but the guys can make do. Again, has Elijah Mitchell, Ramondre Stevenson, Alexander Madison, and Alexander Madison is strictly a backup. Ramondre is a backup who gets some role, and Elijah Mitchell is technically the starter there heading into the offseason, but there is some uncertainty. I do like Elijah Mitchell, but again, I think with any 6th round pick, there's going to be some sort of uncertainty there. And the wide receiver depth is lacking, but has a ton of great quarterback value and depth. On top of that, has that top tier tight end. But this team, unfortunately, didn't really raise any eyebrows for me. And the 2022 ranking I have for Calvin's team is 11th. And then in the 11th spot, we have Dr. Disrespect. And I'm going to talk about the notes just to start off with this team. This team was basically auto-picked the whole draft, so take that with a grain of salt. But my favorite pick here was CMC at the 202. CMC is a 1st round talent in my opinion. Even though I didn't draft him, I kind of went a different direction. But my least favorite pick was Kenneth Walker at the 602. It's just way too early for a guy who doesn't have the profile of a 3-down back in the NFL. And obviously because of all this, because of the auto drafting and whatnot, I have this team ranked in dead last in 12th. And then in the 12th spot, we have my team where I picked from. And my favorite pick by a long shot was Kareem Hunt at the 912. And I know I talked about him briefly, but man, he is criminally underrated. To get a legitimate starting running back for your fantasy team in the 9th round is kind of insane. And he legitimately has running back 2 upside, maybe even low end RB1 upside, just depending on the situation. But to get that in the 9th round, I could not have been happier, especially as my RB3 after waiting so long. And then my least favorite pick here was Jameson Wilson. I would have preferred James Robinson, especially with my running back situation. I love Hunt, but Hunt has had some injuries, and I know you can't predict that, but I think grabbing James Robinson with the expectation that he comes back and has some type of role, especially with a Doug Peterson-led offense, I just think that would have been a better pick. And then some added notes is I waited on quarterback, but still got some adequate value. My team is definitely built for a win now situation with older quarterbacks and wide receivers, and I have some solid youth to build into my roster to give it some balance, but quarterback is a major concern for my team going forward. Again, I think I can compete within the next couple years, but going forward, quarterback would need to be a huge target for me in those rookie drafts. And overall, again, I don't want to sound too biased, but my 2022 ranking would be second. I think that this is a strong contending team, and I am typically pretty honest with my teams, but I just felt like a lot of value fell to me, and I drafted value, and I think because of that, it hurt me at quarterback. But yeah, I think there's some really, really good teams in this league, and I think this would be a really fun league to play in. And that concludes the mock draft review, and a reminder to hit that like, subscribe, notification bell, easiest way to support us. And then also go ahead and hit those comment sections. Let us know who's your favorite team and why. And also either over here or over here, one of these two places, there will be the actual mock draft review in that stream. And then right below that will be a playlist to all our mock draft videos.